How's it going, guys? I am back in the United States, specifically in New Hampshire. And actually right now, I am sitting on the banks of what used to be an old up-down water-powered sawmill, which I thought was pretty cool. So it's a beautiful spot, and I thought it'd be a nice place to film today. So today, I just wanted to make a short video about a simple but very important concept, and that is why you need to keep a forest journal. A forest journal, simply speaking, is a place where you can write down any observation, no matter how basic, about the forest around you. And spring is a great time to do this because you can take note of which species are breaking bud first, the types of sites where the buds break first, insects, what time the insects come out, which insects are prevalent at what time, the color of the foliage, the shades and hues of the specific leaves and the change of those leaves over the spring season. Now, the purpose of doing this is not necessarily what you might think. It's not to, search for questions that you can find the answer to. It's not to even understand exactly what you're seeing, because you can make these observations even without knowing specific species. And actually, that's kind of the point in a way. The purpose is you're training your brain to make observations. You're changing the way your brain perceives the forest and changing the way it perceives reality in many ways. And to understand what I mean, I think a great example is a theory about color and how humans see color. So it's entirely possible that the ancient Greeks did not actually see or perceive, rather, blue the way we do today. And the reason we might think this is because they didn't actually have a word for the color blue. And so in a lot of Homer's poetry, like the Odyssey, the ocean is described as being the color of dark wine. It's not seen as being the color of the sky or anything like that. Instead, it's dark wine. And in fact, most ancient peoples did not have a word for the color blue. There was one notable exception, and that was the Egyptians, and we can actually see the blue dyes they produced in Egyptian artifacts today. The other exception might actually be the ancient Israelites. They had the word teklet, which was supposed to be a sort of divine blue. It's actually why the Israeli flag has blue on it, and blue is associated with Judaism. But we're not entirely sure exactly what color that is, and there's some theories it might be more like a purple. Perhaps more interestingly, there's a tribe of people native to Namibia, and they only have 5 words for color. And they group many colors like red and tan and yellow into the same color, but they actually have multiple words for the color green. And so when scientists have given these people a test of trying to figure out which shade in a given circle is slightly different, like this right here, the people from this tribe can almost immediately pick out which one is different. But when they're shown this wheel, they actually have a more difficult time, but they don't actually have a specific word for the color blue. It's grouped in with the greens. Now let's get away from color for a second and look at taste. Now, I kind of like to make fun of beer and wine snobs for kind of making up words. You can hand them a glass of expired Welch's grape juice and they'll start making up words to describe, oh, this is oaky. And it's like, what are you talking about? Well, what they're doing is they're identifying a particular taste and they're using a word to describe it. And by using a word to describe this taste, they're kind of categorizing it and compartmentalizing it. So what I'm trying to say with all this is language and description, more specifically, have a way of changing the way we can perceive reality. It allows us to better comprehend the world around us and to better pick out details. And that's ultimately the purpose of a forest journal. You're not necessarily making up words, you're not looking for new colors. Instead, you're trying to find differences and qualities and trying to identify them and categorize them, compartmentalize them, and training your brain to look for those differences. Now, trust me when I say this has real power if you do this for even just 1 year. If you're consistent in making observations every time you go out into the forest and writing them down, the differences in your brain and how you experience the forest are going to be completely different. And I know that I can, because I'm trained to do this, I've been doing this for a while now, I can kind of see the forest in ways that other people can't. I will tell my friends that you start to get a little bit of fall foliage and the leaves change color the second week of July in Maine. And they look at me like I have schizophrenia, but every year, the second week of July, you do start to see a yellow tinge on the sugar maples, specifically on hillsides and toward the top of the crown. Or speaking of the fall, I always get annoyed when people talk about peak foliage. To me, there's at least 3 different types of peak. You know, there's the peak you can see from the highway when you're looking at the top of the crowns. There's the peak in the understory, which is my favorite. And then there's the peak in certain species like tamarack and poplar. And those types of observations are fun, but more practically, by kind of figuring these patterns out in a deeper way and understanding the mean, you can more intuitively sense deviations from the norm, and you can better develop your intuition to figure out why there is a deviation. So specifically in regards to changes in leaf color, there's going to be a significant difference in both the shade throughout the year, but also when you really start to see the real fall foliage change in sites that are more stressed. So if you can perceive these differences, if you can see the color changes, you can see the, you can intuit the vigor of the foliage and the leaves, you can better determine what's a stressful site and what's a healthy site. And that has pretty powerful implications in forest management. I'd kind of mentioned earlier that you don't even need to know the species in order to do this, because you'll be able to see that certain trees that look a certain way, have a certain type of bark, certain type of leaf, they're doing this specific thing. And what's really awesome is I was able to firsthand experience the power of doing this sort of thing while I was in Mexico. I was able to experience this fall and spring in the desert, and I was able to see, you know, which flowers were blooming when, which trees were losing their leaves first, and so on. And I had the added benefit of having differing elevation levels. Where I was living was like 6,000 feet, and then I had mountains next to me that went up to 11,000 feet. So I was able to get a wide variety of different sites and climates, and just by having a brain trained to see the differences in the forest, the differences in foliage, the colors, and so on, I was able to intuit a lot about species, the types of sites they occupy, and even the health of certain sites with species that I'm not normally familiar with. So that's what's really cool about this type of system, is if you want to learn forestry, you want to understand the forest better, but you're not a bookish type and you want some of that, you know, backwoods wisdom, it's really just about training your brain to see the things that you wouldn't otherwise see. So especially in this spring season, and, you know, carried out throughout the summer and into the fall, I highly suggest, you know, just go and pick up a blank journal from Walmart, something like that. They also have Write in the Rain books. I'm not a fan of using those for journaling purposes because I like to write in pen. But if you like to carry out in the field with you, probably that's a good idea, especially if you live in a rainy climate. But just go and pick something up and just jot down notes. Doesn't matter how stupid they are. You know, the grass is green. That's perfect. You know, and this is the case of any type of journaling. It's always fun to go back and kind of look at what you were seeing 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And you can even kind of keep records of weather and climatic events as well. You know, is there a year when the leaves broke buds considerably earlier than other years? Same with peak. I remember in 2016, we had one year where peak foliage lasted like a month. It was gorgeous. Oftentimes you'll have peak for a couple days and then the leaves will fall off very quickly, or we'll have a windstorm and they'll all come off in like a day. 2016, we had an entire month where it was just gorgeous leaves, and I think that was mostly because, based on the other observations I was making, based on how nice and sunny the weather was over the summer without it being too dry and thus stressful. So anyway, it's a good practice. So that's all for now. Like I said, just a short video, just a basic video, but an incredibly important one. This is a great exercise, great activity, and it's a great time of year to give it a start. So until next time, guys, I'll catch you later.